Hi everyone, my name is Carl, and in this video I'm going to show you what was added in my new update version 1.2 for my VR sword system that is available on the Unreal Engine marketplace. Cool, so if you open up the new version, this is what you'll see. And if you head into Demo, Maps, and Map Throw, there's a new map called Map Throw. If we load that up, you'll see this. Just wait for the lighting, there we go. Cool. In the past, the swords were quite difficult to throw, and it's just awkward to throw things in VR oftentimes, especially if there's not some kind of throw assist system implemented. So on the request of a lot of users, I have implemented a new throw assist system. So this is what you'll see if you drag a new sword into the world. There are a few things that I've added. Firstly, let me just show you how the throw assist works. It's enabled by default at the moment, so we can disable that to see how the sword reacted previously. We can grab the sword, and if we try to throw it, that's usually what would happen, which isn't all that nice. Just move this a bit closer. So sometimes you would be able to throw the swords in a half decent manner, but the different centers of mass and stuff of the different swords made it very difficult. So now if we go into the sword settings and we turn use throw assist back on, you'll see that now the sword throws much easier. You can just move your arm in a nice smooth motion and the throw assist will do the work for you. Cool. So let's have a look here. There's a throw assist threshold. The throw assist threshold just sets how fast you need to move your hand before the throw assist will kick in. And that makes it possible to still lightly throw the sword between hands, but then when you actually throw it at a proper pace, it'll activate and throw the sword for you. Cool. And then the next cool thing is a targeting assist. So over here, you can add classes that will be targeted by the sword when you throw. And then when you throw the sword, it'll scan in the direction of your throw and look for the targets on this list. And if it finds any of these targets, it'll automatically adjust your aim to hit that specific target. So by default, the blueprint holsters and the blueprint slice meshes are added on this list, but you can take them out or add any other classes. So if you have an enemy that you want to target with the swords, you can just add your enemy blueprint just by clicking over here and then selecting your enemy blueprint from the list. Cool. So let me show you what that does now. Cool. So here we have a target, and in this target there is a invisible holster blueprint right on the center bullseye. So if I throw this now, it'll always hit the bullseye and makes it quite satisfying and easy to do. And as you can see, the swords now actually also stick into the objects. Those hanging objects are slice meshes that are by default in the target list, so we can throw at them as well, and the swords will stick into them automatically. Cool. So that makes it a lot of fun to play with. If you want to add additional targets, let's say you have you've got a bunch of characters and you only want to add a specific character to the list, but not the whole character class, you can look at the additional targets list, and then let's say we have a cube we're going to put into the world. We can head into our sword, and we can, with the eyedropper, select the cube. Now that cube is in our additional targets list. So now the sword will target that cube as well. So it goes to the cube, but it doesn't stick into the cube yet. If you want the swords to stick into objects like this, you must make sure the object has the CanStick tag. So to do that, you can select the object. In the search details, you can just type tag. Then under actor tags, you can add a tag, CanStick. Cool, CanStick. And then under collision, just make sure it generates overlap events. Whoops, I went down too far, sorry. Generate overlap events. There we go. And now the swords will stick into that object as well. That's one way of doing it. And another way you can do it, let's take that out of the target list. So this has the CanStick tag now. And if you go into your sword, you'll see there's an option, CanStick NonTargets. So this won't be targeted by the aim assist. But if you activate this, the sword will still be able to stick into those objects. So it'll still stick, but you'll be able to miss the sword or miss the object as well, because the targeting assist isn't helping you out now. So this is a bit of a more advanced difficulty type thing. Then you actually have to throw it properly in the right direction for it to stick into the objects. Okay. So let us disable that again. Another way you can do that, let's say you want this object, especially if it's a static object, or if it's a character, you can add child actors to that character. Let's say you add one in the head and one in the torso, maybe, of the blueprint holster. So the sword will automatically always target the holster. And if we select that object, let's copy its location, select the holster. If you can't select the holster, just hit T, and you'll be able to select transparent objects. And paste that into a holster. We can turn up the mesh opacity so we can see the holster. So there's a holster now, and then we can set hidden in-game or hide in-game. That way it'll always be hidden in-game, and you won't see the holster, you'll actually just see the object. So wherever this holster is now, you'll be able to stick the swords as well. So let's just undo that. So now it's actually sticking into the holster, but because the holster is overlapping that actor, it'll stick into that actor. And you don't have to add actors to the list and all those things. So you can just stick holsters on anything you want to be able to hit with the sword. Cool. So let's delete the cube. We can grab the holster, put the holster on the wall. Now that area will become a target, and you'll be able to stick that with the swords as well. Let's just move that like that. So as you can see, you can't see the holster now. And if you just throw in that general direction, it'll stick into that area. Cool. So that way you can easily add targets to any object. If you want to hit a specific part of a character's head or body, you can just attach a holster to his head and resize it to be the right dimensions. Cool. And in this level, you'll see there are two targets, as you may have seen already. This one has targeting assist disabled, and all that means is it doesn't have a holster on any part of it, and it's not in the additional targets list of any of the swords. But it does have the CanStick tag assigned to it. So again, if you go into the object and under actor tags, it has the CanStick tag, which means any sword that is set to CanStick NonTargets, if that is enabled, this sword will now be able to stick into that object as well, even though it's not going to help you target. So you have to throw much more accurate on your own, whereas this one has a little invisible holster right over the bullseye, which means you'll nearly always hit the bullseye. Whereas on this one, the swords will just go wherever you actually throw them. Nice. Okay. Next up, let's have a look. Cool. When throw assist activates, it throws the object at a set speed, and you can set that speed over here. So if we set the speed to, by default, it's 2,300. So now if we set that, the throw speed to 1,500, the throw assist will still kick in, but it'll throw the sword much slower. And in the same way, you can adjust the spin speed. If we keep those relatively close to one another, the swords feel quite natural when throwing them. See, now it spins slower as well. Cool. And then let's reset that. And here you'll see the use absolute throw speed setting. And what that does is no matter how fast you move your hand, it'll always throw at those exact speeds and spin rates. But if we disable that, now this number will be multiplied by the actual speed of your hand. So let's have a quick look. So now if I throw a bit slower, it throws slower. But if I throw a bit faster, it actually goes faster. If I throw much faster. So it's a bit more natural feeling, but it's a bit more challenging as well. So you can now throw the swords slowly, or you can throw them fast by actually throwing them fast. And it takes a little bit of practice, but it's much easier than actually throwing VR objects without a throw assist enabled. Cool. I'm going to leave that on for now. CanStick NonTargets. That means the swords will stick into anything that has the CanStick tag. And we went over that earlier with the cube. Cool. Can slice when thrown. Cool. Previously, the swords would slice the slice actors if you threw them at them. So when I implemented this new sticking into the object system, I disabled that, but I still gave you the option to re-enable that. And instead of sticking into objects now, the swords will actually slice the objects. So if we enable that, can slice when thrown for this sword. Now it shouldn't stick into that object, it'll actually slice it. So you have that option as well. As you can see, now it slices the slice objects. As long as it's a slice object, obviously you won't be able to slice any objects in the world. It still needs to be a slice object. Cool. So we can just disable that so the swords will stick into objects again. Cool. And then we have draw, trace, debug. And if you enable that, you'll be able to see where the sword traces and looks for targets when it's thrown. And then it'll help you fine-tune that cone. Let me show you quickly. So if you throw that, you'll see it traces in every one of those spheres is a trace line that is looking for a target. And as soon as one of those hits a target, that target is assigned as the target for the sword, and your aim is adjusted towards that target. And as you see, there's a whole bunch starting from the center, and then there's circles going out towards the edges. And as soon as it hits something, it stops the trace, or as soon as it hits a target, it'll stop the trace and assign that target as the target for the sword. So if I throw at this target over there, there is a holster mesh right in the center there. So if one of those traces hits that target, that'll be a sign and the sword will be thrown at that target. So let's check that out. You'll see my actual throw would have hit the floor there, but then one of those traces hit that target and it adjusted my aim to hit the actual target. So as you can see, there my aim was pretty good, and the first initial trace hit the target, so no extra traces were done. As you can see, cool. The next settings we have is trace count. Now trace count is how many steps from the center it goes out. So by default it's set to 6. If we set that to something like 2, now you'll see it'll only do the center trace and then one circle around that. So you'll have to be more accurate for the sword to actually hit the target. There we go. So that's much more difficult now. So that's why I set it to 6 by default. So you get a nice cone. The next one, throw, assist, trace, angle. So that is the angle at which each new trace layer goes out. So by default it's 2.5. If we make that 1, you'll have a much narrower cone, as you can see, but your trace layers are much closer to each other. So it'll be a more accurate trace for, let's say you've got smaller targets and you don't want any of the targets to be able to sneak in between those lines. So that's one of the options. You can make that smaller, the trace angle, and then maybe turn that up the trace count up to 20. So now it'll have 20 trace layers going up in increments of 1 degree. So there you can see, now they're very close to each other. And that's a bit overkill, and it may hurt your performance a bit. So there's something else we can do instead of that. So let's put that back to 6, that back to 2.5. And if we look at this now, you'll see there are still places in between the dots where a target can slip through the cracks, basically. And to fix that, we can look at the last setting here, which is trace sphere radius. I'll go over the one above that just now. So trace sphere radius just affects how big those actual spheres are. So if we turn that up to 40 maybe, now you see those spheres are a lot bigger, and the space in between those are a bit smaller. So that'll give you a nicer area. But I included that so that you can test it in your specific situation. So let's say you've got a game where you throw a target like this. You'll see those large spheres, because the targets are usually much closer, those large spheres aren't needed. So we can just turn that back to default. Cool. And the last setting here that I just mentioned was target search trace distance. And that's just how far the trace will go out from your hand when the sword is thrown. So if you want to be able to find targets that are a bit further away, you can maybe set that to 3000. And now those traces go out much further. And it's much easier to see in VR because you can see the depth. So it's much easier to judge what your values should be. Cool, that's it for the throw assist. You'll see another thing that I added is collide while slicing, because by default collision is turned off every time you hear the swish sound, which means the sword is moving fast enough to slice. The collision is turned off between the swords. So if I would have a sword fight and I would slice at this sword, it would just go through. So if I go backwards, it works because collision is not turned off, because it's not a double-sided sword and it only slices when moving forward. So what we can do now is we can enable collide while slicing. And if that is enabled, then the sword will always collide with other swords, even when slicing. So that way you can have a sword fight and block swords and stuff like that now without the sword passing through other swords or other objects even. Because in the past as well, if you went fast enough to slice and you hit a solid object, it would pass into the object and clip into the object. But with that simple option, it's fixed now. One thing to just keep in mind is that if you slice objects now with these swords that actually collide, it may hit the part of the object out of the way because the sword is actually colliding with the object as it's slicing it as well. But it may not be a major problem for you. I just wanted to give you the option to do that as well. In a feature update, I plan on adding particle effects and sound effects for the swords as well when they hit other objects and hit each other as well. So that isn't included in this update yet, but it is something that I'm working on. Cool, and that's it for the swords. Another thing that I added in this update is the new force grab system. A lot of commercial games have a system like this where you can grab objects that are just out of reach of your hand. And that makes it a lot easier, especially if you have a smaller play space. So let's say I wasn't able to move from this spot, I wouldn't be able to reach that sword at the moment. But then we've got the force grab, and if I press the force grab buttons, the default controls for the Oculus controllers are Y and B, so it's your top two face buttons, the top face buttons on each of the controllers. If you hold that, it'll activate your force grab mesh, and then if that finds a sword, it'll turn green to indicate that you can grab that sword from a distance now. And if I let go, it goes away again. And then you just grab the swords normally with your triggers or your grip buttons like you would do. You can just adjust the controls for your specific headset. Let me just show you where the force grab is actually activated. If you go into pawn motion controller pawn swords. You'll see there's an activate force grab and reset level comment over here. Let's just zoom in. Cool. And there I use motion controller face button 2, motion controller face button 2 for the left controller and for the right controller. So if you want to customize your controls, you can either create inputs in your project settings and then just use those inputs. When it's pressed, it activates force grab for the left controller, and when it's released, it deactivates force grab for the left controller, and the same for the right controller. So it's easy to customize that as well. Cool. And the way it works, if you activate force grab, you'll see it turns greenish, and then if I just grab it normally with the grip button, I can grab stuff from a distance now. Cool, so that's very handy. And you'll see the force grab only goes out to a certain spot at the moment, and you can adjust that as well if you want. If you go to pawn and go into BP motion controller swords, that's where the force grab happens. You'll see there's a force grab box over here, and in the variables you'll see there's a force grab distance. By default that's 600, so if you increase that or decrease that, so let's say we make that 300, we play again, now you'll only be able to force grab stuff that is about 3 meters away from you. So that's going to be too far now, I won't be able to grab that. Cool. So you can decide in your specific game, in your specific situation, how far you want the player to be able to grab stuff with the force grab, and you can just adjust that. So if you wanted to make it really far, you'll see it goes out pretty far. Now I can grab those in that middle block, which is a bit further away. Cool. So I'm going to leave that at 600 to start with, and you can adjust that to whatever values you want. Cool. And one last thing, there were a few questions about the migration to another project, and I've got a video on my channel that shows you how to step-by-step migrate the system to a VR project that is already using a different pawn or different motion controller blueprints. But that was made for the first version that didn't have the advanced physics or now this throw system or the force grab system. So that's why in the blueprints you'll see I added all the stuff that I added into the motion controller blueprint is now colored green so that you can easily see what was done over here if you want to add any of these functions into your motion controller blueprint. So this is where the physics grab occurs. So if this isn't in your blueprint, you won't be able to use the advanced physics of the swords. And this is the force grab, and you'll obviously need to create all these variables, and you'll see there are two functions as well. So you'll need to create a function called fn reset hands and fn physics grab, and then just copy this over to this one and copy that over to the other one, and then in these grabbing functions you'll see there are green boxes as well of stuff that I added in to make everything work in the way it does. So it may be easier to, instead of trying to copy all of this over to your blueprint, depending on how much work you've done and how much stuff you've changed on your side on your blueprints, it may be easier to just use my blueprint and then just add your functionality back into here, because you'll obviously know what's going on with your code and stuff. But I plan on doing another complete migration video that'll take you step by step through the process of adding my VR sword system into your existing VR project. And I'll do that as soon as all the major updates are finished that I've got planned. Thank you very much for all your support and all your feedback. A lot of the stuff that was implemented in updates was suggested by users, and I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your ideas as well. So if you have any suggestions or any requests, please just let me know. You can email me or post a question on the marketplace page. And that is about it. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have an awesome day.